Okay, we are live now. Um, we are live now on Facebook, and I just want to welcome everyone to our Just Us Dialogues webinar series. What we know is that racial inequality, among other social justice issues, is at the forefront of America right now. Johns Hopkins University and Medicine, along with Johns Hopkins Urban Health Institute, is hosting this Just Us Dialogues, a social justice webinar series that offers a platform for cohesive conversations around justice. Various social justice and civil rights experts will discuss a variety of topics. Tonight, we are blessed to have Benjamin Crump, William Murphy, and Dr. Shani Bugs with us this evening to talk. I'm going to give brief bios and then to launch right in because this is a true treat. Ben Crump, who is a friend to me, but a stranger to all of us, is a civil rights leader of our time. His role in Trayvon Martin's cases, Martin Lee Anderson boot camp cases, Janie Ligon's case, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of them shows a great legacy that he is building around that the Constitution and the laws and the things that it provides should apply to everyone. Ben is a past president of the National Bar, the first African-American president of the Federal Bar Association for the Northern District of Florida. He is a frequent speaker and author, and more importantly, he is a man who gives to his community and has endowed scholarships at Florida A&M, Florida State, Bethune-Cookman, and helped many minority law students get to and through law school, but get into practice. Next, we have Dr. Shani Bugs. She is a postdoctoral fellow with the Violence Prevention Research Program at UC Davis. She is a world-renowned expert, and we are so pleased to have her here today. She earned her doctorate in health policy and public policy at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and has helped to coordinate efforts and provide technical assistance on violence production and prevention strategies. And last but certainly not least is Billy Murphy. Billy is a friend, a father to many of us in the bar, a mentor, someone who has just been a civil rights leader in our community and across this country. He has a 90% win record, which I think might be a little low for you, Billy. He is a graduate of MIT, is followed in the great footsteps of his father, William Murphy Sr., who's one of the first African-American judges to preside in Baltimore. He is a superstar attorney, also a huge benefit to University of Maryland School of Law. I know personally many students who would not have been able to go through law school if it weren't for Billy. We're just pleased to have all three of you here tonight. And I want to open it up and really start with a conversation because I think people really want to know who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an advocate in this criminal justice field. Why don't we start with Billy and then we go to Ben and then Shani.
Well, I was blessed by the Lord to be born into the family of William and Madeline Murphy, for whom I have tremendous indebtedness because they taught me everything that I know about race and about criminal injustice, and they have made me the person who I am today. And without them, God knows what I would have been. I'd have probably been born in a hollow log drinking muddy water. And I started in my father's footsteps to become a lawyer after becoming an engineer in the aerospace program. And I left the aerospace program because it was overtly racist. And I left corporate America for the same reason and decided that my fate was in self-employment as a lawyer. And I've been a lawyer since 1970. And I celebrated my 50th anniversary at the bar this past February the 1st. I've handled all kinds of cases. I started out primarily as a criminal lawyer, but then I branched out into the civil practice of law. seeking compensation for victims of not only racism, but medical malpractice, of all kinds of catastrophic injuries. And that's what we do today. My biggest verdict in a police brutality case is $44 million. And I represented the family of Freddie Gray. We got that family $6.4 million. And we're about to eclipse both records, so stay tuned.
Oh, wow. Wow. Ben, how did you get started in this field and being a civil rights leader of our time?
Well, Alicia, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm so very honored to be with Dr. Bugs and one of the true icons, my mentor and frat brother, Billy Murphy. And a lot of things that we do, we truly stand on the shoulders of giants like Billy Murphy. How did I become a passionate advocate? Well, Alicia, I was born in Lumberton, North Carolina. My mother, Helen, raised me and my two younger brothers in the government housing projects. I watched her work 2 jobs, sacrifice everything for us to keep a roof over our head, food on the table and the lights on, and hope in our heart. And I just remember my mother always saying, life ain't fair, baby. Life is hard. You make it fair by what you bring to the table. And if you don't bring anything to the table, don't expect anybody to let you sit at the table. And she always talked about education is something to bring to the table. And so I remember in the 4th grade when they bused us across the tracks, literally, to the new schools with the new facilities and technology and new books, and they had everything. I remember as a 9-year-old little boy on the school bus coming back across the tracks saying, man, I wonder why people in that community got everything and people in our community have hardly anything. And I remember my mother told me the reason that we got to go to the new schools with the new books and new technology was because of Brown versus the Board of Education and Billy Murphy's homeboy, Thurgood Marshall. And I decided right then as a 9-year-old boy, I want to be like Thurgood Marshall so I can try to help people in my community and people who look like me. And from that day to this one, that is still my goal, to try to help my people in our community. And so that's where my passion stems from, my Black mother and that desire to even the playing field.
Wow, wow, wow. And Dr. Bugs?
Yes, hi, I'm sorry. We're in Sacramento, we're having some difficulties with the fires locally, so power keeps going in and out. So I apologize for having to switch. But how I got started, I moved to Baltimore in the summer of 2012 to go to Johns Hopkins for grad school. And that, about a week after I moved, the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting happened. And I remember being stunned by how tragic that incident was, but also how little attention was being paid to the far more regular shootings and killings that were happening in Baltimore. And I happened to be at the time, the only academic institution in the country that had a Center for Gun Policy and Research. And so I shifted my academic studies and began focusing on gun violence prevention policy and research. And then while in my grad program, I worked at the mayor's office under the then Deputy Mayor of Emergency Management and Public Safety, helping to coordinate Baltimore's violent crime reduction strategy. And I saw how frequently our societal response to violence is too narrowly focused, and we don't consider the systemic and structural upstream issues that really impact how communities and families are safe. And so ever since then, I've really devoted my research and time to uplifting the voices of those who are most impacted and making sure that I'm prioritizing community-driven and community-centered strategies around violence prevention.
Excellent, excellent. Now, I want to get into a history of as a part of this dialogue of the issue. And, to Ben, it's been 10 years since the death of Trayvon Martin. And just a couple months since the death of George Floyd. What has changed during that time as it relates to violence against Black and men and women?
Well, Alicia, I will tell you, as we go in courtrooms, we try to look at statistics and data. And based on the statistics, not much has changed in those 10 years, other than the fact that we are more aware of it now because of the advent of technology. When you think about the dynamics of the fastest way to get on death row in America is to be a person of color, and there are two ways. A person of color who kills a white person. Fastest way to get on death row in America. Second fastest way to get on death row in America is to be a person of color and to be accused of killing a white person. Now, when you juxtapose that and you have a white person who kills a person of color, the statistics don't bear out the same. White people aren't getting on death row for killing Black people. In fact, the reality is they kill us, and there's no guarantee they even go to jail, even get arrested if they say, stand your ground or one of these other things. Remember Amber Geiger and Botham Jones on her castle doctrine theory, even though she was in his apartment. I say that to say this: the courts, our legal system, continue to tell white people in America through the intellectual justification of discrimination that if you kill Black people, it's no certainty that you're going to be held accountable by the justice system. But what does it tell Black people and brown people? If you kill white people, the message is clear. Without them saying a word, the message is clear that you are going to prison or you're going to death row. And the message is so loud and clear that even the police officers know it. When it's a Black or brown person, they shoot first and ask questions later. But when it's a white person, they try to de-escalate situations. Just think about, when a Black person has a cell phone or moves a certain way, they shoot first and ask questions later. But you have these white kids literally can be confirmed mass murderers, as Dr. Bugs was talking about Aurora. Think about Parkland. 34 people this young white boy shot, killing 17 of them. The police followed him for hours and they took him alive. And then you think about the Waffle House killing in Tennessee, shot and killed 4 people, went with his gun into the woods. The police followed them, Billy, into the woods, and they all came out alive. Man, can you imagine if that was a Black man who killed 4 people and it was confirmed and they went into the woods, whether he would have came out alive? And then worst of all is Dylan Roof, the young white supremacist in South Carolina who killed 9 of the most innocent people you could ever find. And the fact that they followed him not only for hours, they followed him across state lines from North Carolina to South Carolina. And when they apprehended him, they took him to Burger King to get a burger and fries on the way to jail because the message is being sent by our court system that we value Black life and white life differently. And so the greatest difference, the greatest progress, if we have made any, has literally been technology that we get to see it. And Black Lives Matter now has become not just a mental thought, but it's a visual thought. When you look at George Floyd, when you look at Ahmaud Arbery, when you look at all these cases where Terrence Crutcher, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, where they're killing us just on video. And now we are seeing the visual description of the intellectual justification of discrimination. That is the biggest difference, in my opinion.
Billy, what would you say? Thank you for that, Billy.
I think you got to look at the history of policing in America and of racism, which I prefer to call white supremacy in America. It's all based on the assumption that Black people are subhuman, that the descendants of African slaves are subhuman. And because of that assumption, we have not been able to get justice in America at any significant level from the time predating the founding fathers up to the present. And the evidence of that is that as late as 2017, the federal judiciary did a study of its own sentencing processes and results, and found that Black people and brown people are incarcerated at a higher level than whites similarly situated. In other words, they found that Blacks and browns get 20% higher sentences than whites. And if that isn't racism, what else could it be? And this is pound for pound, situation for situation, criminal background for criminal background across the board in the federal system. And we have the history of Black oppression and the oppression of women defines our criminal justice system. And so if you look at what has happened since the beginnings of slavery, we have a system that has consistently and relentlessly given different outcomes to people in the criminal justice system, worse outcomes simply because they are Black or they are female. We see the persistence of white men dominating the judiciary. Only in 1968, when I was 23 years old, did we have Blacks on a jury in America for the first time, when we passed first a federal statute requiring that in the federal court, and then state by state statutes eliminating the exclusion of Blacks from juries. We now have mass incarceration, which probably is the single most destructive policy in America in destroying Black families and the futures of Black children, the employment prospects of Black men, and on and on. We've seen that the law has been bent to serve white supremacy because we have eliminated, for example, the exclusionary rule that ruled that if the police illegally seize evidence, it can't be admitted in a court of law. And that rule was fine as long as whites were being adjudicated, but as soon as Blacks got involved, it was virtually eliminated. If we look at sentencing policies, we were oppressed by the so-called sentencing guidelines, which were implemented by Southern whites, such that we got higher and higher and higher sentences than our white counterparts. We have been subjected to pretrial proceedings, arrests without probable cause, searches without probable cause, prosecutors who selectively prosecute us, trial procedures that are weighted heavily towards finding guilt. And all of these so-called regressive reforms occurred when we had racist presidents like Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and others going forward. And so we are now trapped in a system that is based on the assumption that we are inferior to whites. And this system has also had consequences to our psyche. Both women and Blacks have been inferiorized psychologically, such that we have lower aims. And I'm not talking about everybody, obviously. I hope it's obvious I'm not talking about everybody. But we see the persistence of low aims. We see the persistence of not wanting to become educated. We see the persistence of oppression in so many manifestations. And so we are a changed people. We were once mighty lions and lionesses, but we've been reduced to the status of toothless domestic animals. And you see that we are only now beginning to flex our muscles, and we're only now beginning to get traction. And we see a resistance to the changes that are necessary because we have a president, for example, who is viewed by white supremacists across the country and the world as being one of them. And so until we can get rid of that cancer on our system, we are doomed to be set back in every conceivable way. And the judges that Trump has appointed were selected by a criteria that they believe in the expansion of executive power, and they believe in the persistence of racism in America, white male supremacy. And so we still haven't passed a constitutional amendment giving women full rights in America. And we still have not implemented any mechanism to eliminate racism from American life, including the absence of Black people and women as significant historical figures in the history of America. And we did not teach whites about the history of slavery, the vile history of mutilations and being burned at the stake and being hung from trees, being murdered for no reason whatsoever. Whites and Blacks alike have not been educated about why we are in the situation we're in today and why it persists.
And that's a good point. Yeah.
But let me make one last point.
Oh, sure. You're good, Billy.
We have an educational system that is regressive, because in every state of the union, it is literally forbidden, not necessarily by law, but by the persistence of white male supremacy. We're forbidden from teaching the true history of what happened to the Africans who were enslaved in America and why we're in the sorry state we are in today. And so we went through a process of inferiorization, and our inferiorization results in people looking at us as though we were always this way. And that isn't true by any stretch of the imagination, but it accounts for why our criminal procedures, our arrest rates, our way of being policed, the persistence of police perjury, a variety of things that are still parts of the institutionalization of white male supremacy in America.
No,
and by the way, thank you for inviting me, Alicia.
Always, Billy. If I have an invitation, you're always getting invited by me.
Well, thank you, and let me give kudos to my really, really good friend Ben Crump. Ben, congratulations on all you have been doing, and to my new friend, Ms. Buggs, congratulations on your ascendancy into becoming a vital part of the conversation.
Yes. And that's a good segue, because I like Dr. Buggs to talk a little bit about how effective are the policies. Ben and Billy talked about the policies that are, in many ways believed to, tamp down violence. How are those policies at reducing violence and what we're seeing in the increased level of gun violence in communities?
Yes, sure. So Mr. Murphy just eloquently talked about the history of white supremacy and of policing, and how policing has been used as an apparatus of terror and racist oppression for many, many, many years. And, law enforcement has been indifferent or complicit in violence in communities. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and there's stories upon stories about bombings where law enforcement was involved or stood on the sidelines when Black individuals were harassed or terrorized or killed. And there continues to be policing used as oppression and as a form of terror in many communities. And so the laws that involve policing they may have some reduction effects in the short term, but that's often because you're using coercive and oppressive tactics. And so in the short term, they may resolve violence or reduce violence in small areas, but you're essentially agreeing that will allow for occupation or oppression in order for violence to go down. And so policing does not address the hows and the whys of violence. It is not built to do so. And so what we need to do is focus on healing traumas and addressing the multitude of harms that have been done to the Black community, because policing has not addressed the hows and the whys. There is great distrust and mistrust of policing in Black and brown communities. And so what we see is that people take justice and matters of fairness into their own hands. And so what we continue to see is that you will have spikes in violence. We see cities like Baltimore, cities like Chicago, there are certain neighborhoods that have continued to have high rates of violence, even though they have high rates of police contact and high rates of police occupancy, because we're not ever addressing the traumas. We're not getting to the hows and the whys of why the violence is occurring. And so some of the policies have been shown to be effective, but they are only effective in the short term, and they end up operating more as suppressive and oppressive tactics rather than really addressing the root causes of what's going on and why the violence is occurring.
It's a good point. I want to remind people you can text your questions in, and people are putting their questions in. People are very much enjoying this conversation. Text your questions to 22333 and type JHUWL in the message, and we'll get your and make sure that they're presented. Let me ask this question and go back to Ben. Let me ask you this question. I know you are being called on by mayors and governors from around the country, and I know you may have to skedaddle on us at some point as of a pressing issue, and we thank you just for all you do. Can you talk about what is one of the priorities? If you had the ability to, and I know you do, talk to our highest leaders of our country, what would you say is a priority as it relates to criminal justice reform? And I know that you are representing, sadly, far too many families: Breonna Taylor's family, George Floyd's family, Ahmaud Arbery. Can you talk about what you would do so that we don't have to broadcast another funeral for one of those young people?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Alicia. And I apologize, I probably do have to run. Well, first of all, I would call Billy Murphy and say, Billy, if we got their ear, what we gonna tell them today? But not that I think, not that I know if they're gonna listen sincerely, but I will say this, and I know Attorney Murphy has deliberated on this. And yeah, I'll say this just because every time I get a chance, Bill is a brilliant man. Dr. Bugs, you're brilliant too, but every time I get a chance to talk to Bill, I'll be like, dang, Billy, brilliant, man. I see why he went to MIT. So with that said, I'm sure he's gonna be profound on this answer too, Alicia. I will tell them two things. And I often said in jury selection, when we pick these predominantly white juries, and I get in a little trouble at times. So yeah, I'll come and get me, Alicia, if they ever put me in jail.
No, you're fine. I'll come get you. I'll help you.
All right. I asked them, I know we in America can recite the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. The question is, do you believe it? When they say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I honestly believe in their mind, they say, we just really don't believe that they're as intelligent as us. Deep down in our heart, I just don't think the Black man is as resourceful as us, that kind of thing. And so if you get an opportunity to talk to them, you speak truth to power, and you say, if you don't believe in your Declaration of Independence, why do you continue to lie? That's first of all. And then secondly, you start trying to talk about the institutions. People come and go, but the institutions live far beyond us. So you start really looking like what we're trying to do with this George Floyd Justice and Police and Accountability Act. You try to say, this is a moment we have, and we don't want to lose the moment to say we need systematic reform in policing, changing the culture and the behavior of policing in America. Other than that, it's going to keep happening. And how do you get that systematic reform? We can't continue to do the things we're doing and expect different results. If we don't have transparency plus accountability, we never gonna get the trust, because, and I'm sure Billy can tell you in Baltimore, Dr. Bugs, if you're in Sacramento, every time they arrest a brother, they can have no evidence at all, but they always find a way to convict us. You heard those statistics Billy talked about, but yet when the roles are reversed and you have a dead Black person on the ground and the police are accused of doing something nefarious, it seems like we can never get accountability. So that's why you have this bridge of mistrust that just keeps growing. And so until we get transparency, and with technology now, there's no excuse. Like, and I know they lying to us on Breonna Taylor, but it's just crazy that you're gonna go have a no-knock warrant. You got all the technology to turn on the body camera, but you say you didn't have it on. If you don't have transparency plus accountability, then you don't get the trust. So that's what my arguments will be. Let's just be transparent. Let's just be honest so we can finally try to address the problem, because if we don't admit a problem, we can never get to a solution. And I think America still refuses to admit the problem.
Let me go back, if I can, to
Billy, I love you. I'll call you this weekend.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
And thank you, Ben, for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben.
When it comes to what the agenda ought to be to eliminate these systemic problems, we have to start out, as many of us are doing, with what do we do about racist police officers who relentlessly commit perjury against Black people and have it overlooked by judges who refuse to believe that they are liars unless cross-examination brings it out, or unless there's some kind of extrinsic evidence to back it up. Over and over, we see that policemen get believed over Black people and over poor white people, routinely, dismally routinely. And so what do we do about this? Well, first of all, we have to have serious police reform in the following ways. Number one, we've got to get rid of existing white supremacist police officers. Number two, we've got to prevent white supremacist police officers from being hired by doing rigorous psychological testing aimed at rooting out people who are not fit. There's an interesting statistic that across the world, 4% of the population is unfit to be a police officer because of their attitudes. On the other hand, when you look at the applicant pool for who wants to be a police officer, 40% of the police officers are unfit who apply. 40% of the applicants for police forces around the country are unfit to be police officers. And one of the sorry things about Baltimore, just to give you an example, is that we had a psychiatrist, or psychologist rather, whose job it was to screen out these unfit police officers. And he was there for 40 years until we got rid of him. And what he was doing was giving tests that had no meaning and no foundational reliability to give results that would have screened out these kinds of police officers. So for 40 years, we got basically unscreened police officers, many of whom are in this 40% number, who are policing us in the city of Baltimore, and we haven't figured out how to get rid of them. And so Baltimore is a unique problem. We need to take over the entire police department. Some of us have been reluctant to do that because of liability concerns. But we must get adequate insurance so that when people are victimized by what we know is a scourge like this, that there is adequate funds to fairly compensate them and to hold police officers accountable and governments who permit them to act this way accountable. Number two, we've got to make sure that we view policing as a community enterprise where the police officers get to know the communities they police. They get to know who the bad apples are rather than throw out the whole barrel. They get to know the population in a way that creates trust and confidence so that they can find out who just committed the murder. Now we have police officers who do not have this connection to the community. They don't know the families in the community. They don't know the good people from the bad people. They go from one bad incident to another bad incident, insulated from the population by motorized police cars. And so all they see is the bad in us. And so they treat us uniformly across the board as though we are in that category because that's all they see. So there are lots of problems we got to carefully address. And one of the major problems is the persistence of bigotry plus power. I call that racism, bigotry plus power. And so we must make racism in any form, not just in the context of arrests or prosecutions or sentencing or whatever. We must make racism a federal and a state crime. You know, that's what we did in Nazi Germany. We outlawed Nazism. That's what we made happen in Japan. We outlawed their racist beliefs as well by reforming the education system and teaching people that racism is wrong, teaching people how it came about, teaching people why it is morally reprehensible to continue to believe that just based on skin color or gender, people are inferior to white men. This has got to stop.
Yeah. And Dr. Bugs, what would you say? And I'm going to, as you do that, as you answer the question of how would you police reform, we have received so many questions. So I'm going to rapid fire them to you as we go. But could you talk about that? What would police reform look like?
Well, I think Mr. Murphy highlighted some important changes that can happen at the level of reform. But I think, you know, the current social movement and the conversation around defunding the police is really about recognizing the limitations of reform. The movement is not about individual police officers, it's about the institution of policing. And as Mr. Murphy highlighted, and as I spoke to earlier, you know, the institution was designed as a way to oppress and control. And there are important and immediate reforms that should be taking place now because we have the institution of policing right now. And Mr. Murphy is far more knowledgeable about what those are. As he talked about his illustrious career, he's very clear about what reforms need to be taking place now. But the conversation around divesting from police and investing in communities is really about addressing the whys around how do we keep communities safe. And police are a response to the violence, but they're not a cure to violence. They're not a cure to the economic and social ills that co-occur with violent activity. And so we need to be talking about how do we actually invest in what makes communities safe? How do we actually hold people accountable for harms being done? And, you know, Mr. Crump talked about Breonna Taylor. There are harms that are done by police, and then there's justifications for that harm being done. Mr. Crump also talked about the people not being held accountable for killing Black individuals. The clearance rate for homicides and non-fatal shootings in Black and Hispanic communities in our country has plummeted And so people aren't being held accountable for harms being done. And so the conversation around defunding is really about investing in communities and investing in that stability that makes communities safe. In Baltimore, Roland Park isn't flooded with police officers. There are families and schools and stable environments for young people. There are things for young people to do. There's high quality education, early childhood supports and investments. And those are the kinds of priorities that I think we should be focusing on, is really thinking about what does safety look like and how do we meet the needs for safety for all communities? Whereas the conversation has too long been narrowly focused on some communities, and the needs of other communities have just gone unheard and dismissed.
Well, one of the problems, though, is related directly to the criminal justice system, and that is the outcomes from mass incarceration. When you incarcerate someone for way too long or unfairly, you put that person in an incredibly lawless environment where the inmates run the prisons, and all kinds of terrible things happen as a result. And when you deprive them of the programs that used to exist when the jails were predominantly white to rehabilitate people so that they get educated while they're in prison and they get reoriented to getting back to work when they come out and they become productive citizens of this country. When you eliminate those programs, you make it incredibly harder to do the things that you say need to be done. And violence, to a great degree, has its roots in prison culture because the guards have been corrupted by gangs and they serve at the pleasure of gang members, because gang members have an outside of the jail reach into their families, into their children, and they can threaten them to do all kinds of things to overlook what is going on in our prisons. And so we need to find alternatives to incarceration. We need to stop putting nonviolent people in jail. We need to take another look at sentencing policies so that they become humane instead of instruments of oppression. So I agree with you, but until we get the albatross of mass incarceration off our neck, and by the way, Trump did not eliminate mass incarceration, and his so-called criminal justice reform efforts are pitiful compared to what the need for reform is. And so our first priority is to dismantle this destroyer of Black families, this destroyer of Black men and women, so that they can be raising their children, so that they can be fathers and mothers. We also need to eliminate the scourge of opiate addiction and addiction to other terrible drugs. And we have no money in the budget to do that. So people are waiting to be treated who want to eliminate their drug habits. And so all kinds of things are intertwined here that make the Black communities that we live in increasingly more dangerous. You become a killer in prison.
Yeah, no, that leads to a question that I've seen multiple times in both the chat and the question and answer, which is, how do I, as an individual, as a citizen, how do I participate in the change you're talking about? What can I do? What requests could I make to elected officials, to others, to gain momentum around the changes that you're talking about? Having people feel like they belong and included, but also having them just thrive and live productive lives without the limitations that you talked about. What would you say I received this question about 4 times this evening. What can I do as an individual?
Well, first of all, you can campaign relentlessly in the states right near Baltimore against Donald Trump and his reelection. That's priority number 1. He is the single biggest impediment to the reforms we are talking about. Because as
we're
I
a
said
nonprofit,
earlier,
so Billy is saying this. Billy is saying we're a nonprofit.
Well, I'm not bound by that. You're bound by that, but I'm not bound by that. So that's number 1. We got to recognize that he's an overt racist. We've got to recognize that he means us no good. We've got to recognize, as Barack Obama said last night, or the night, last night I think it was, that he is destroying our democracy. He is depriving us as best he can of our right to vote. We have to understand that he has put into place 200 judges who agree with him about what needs to be done. And we also have to recognize a peculiar phenomenon that's new in America, and that is that within the next generation, because of the birth rates, we're going to be a minority majority country, and that's freaking a lot of white supremacists out, because the last thing they want to see as white supremacists is that blacks, browns, women, gays, immigrants and the descendants of immigrants are running this country. That's something that that is literally psychologically destabilizing people who are white supremacists, because this would spell the end of white supremacy in America.
Dr. Bugs, what would you say? Individuals.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, if some of what you're hearing today is it's the first time you're hearing it, I think it's really important to sit with it and to think about, what has 2020 meant for you. We have COVID and all of it, the revelations of the inequities that exist because of the pandemic. We have a viable opportunity to have the first Black woman as the Vice President of the United States. We have children dying by gunfire. We have, conversations around structural racism and police reform and reimagining public safety. And I think it's really important to think about, it's a lot going on this year. So, think about what does it mean to you? And where do you really want to get involved? And because particularly as it relates to conversations around police reform and defunding the police, these are new concepts. The idea about reimagining public safety and existing without police as we currently know them today is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I think I encourage people to learn more and really think about what it means for them and where and how they feel about when we talk about white supremacy and we talk about structural racism and how it impacts every single institution in our lives. What does that mean for you? And then act on those feelings and let those feelings move you. And I would also say, if you are moved to act, then get involved in what's happening locally. There are organizations in cities around the country that are starting to say, okay, let's look at city budgets. Let's start to think about how money is being spent, and do those monies align with the priorities of my family and my community? Do we really want to be investing large percentages of our budgets towards punishment and corrections? Or do we really want to invest in family stability? Do you believe that every family and community should be safe? And then get involved in how those organizations are pushing on legislators to be transparent and to begin changing how we prioritize our efforts at the local level and at the state level and the federal level.
Let me add something to that. I agree with what you've said. But people, I think Alicia is asking us for specific things that we would advocate that people insist happen, specific changes. The second most important thing is making sure that every police officer is equipped with a body camera, and that the state of Maryland and wherever you're from, that local government pay for that across the board, because that will eliminate a tremendous amount of injustice. And it will also check the police from going too far, even though some of these attitudes by the police are so ingrained that they do brutal things while they know they're on a camera. And so this is a way of galvanizing America and never letting them forget, never letting our communities forget what the police actually do by making sure it's all on video. And not only should we implement body cameras throughout and pay for them, but we should make penalties very strict and meaningful. If you turn off the camera when you're supposed to have it on, and if you don't turn it on when you're supposed to have it on.
Well, what I will
Go ahead.
add is that the studies on body cameras have shown that they are not effective at changing police practices. They may reduce some complaints, but in terms of rates of excessive force, the body cameras, I agree with you that having the camera footage helps to make the case and helps to increase transparency, but there's also the limits to that. And so I think why I was giving the answer that I gave is because there are a lot of people that I come in contact with who say the reforms are not far enough and we need to be having different conversations. And I think there's room for everyone to get involved, no matter where you are on the continuum of reform or totally transforming policing today. And I think it's important to figure out what it means to you and then get involved wherever you see fit, because we need everyone acting.
Mhm.
Well, I disagree
one,
with
we
you
have some-
about the efficacy and effectiveness of police body cameras because we have not yet fully implemented them, and where we have not created adequate penalties for them being turned on and off inappropriately, we don't really get a fair view of what will happen if they become universalized. And so when we require recordings of interrogations, that stops the police from overreaching. When we require recordings of identification procedures, there's no question that stops them from using impermissibly suggestive means to identify an alleged perpetrator. And so we've got to give body cameras their full shot. And the other advantage of body cameras is that when the police do misbehave, it's there for all to see. And imagine what it would be like if a citizen had not had a camera on in the incident, the most recent incident out in the Midwest. Can you imagine how that would have played out? It would have been controversy. The police would have lied, and there would have been no evidence to show that they were lying. And so body cameras play an integral role in this. Just ask any criminal defense lawyer. I mean, when their clients get caught on body cameras committing a crime, their clients usually get convicted. Likewise, when police officers are shown to have committed grievous misconduct, they should be immediately removed from the force pending a thorough investigation in case they have a defense. But when you don't use body cameras that way, they're not going to be effective. When you have a police administration that keeps police officers who have committed many acts of misconduct, you're not going to change police behavior. When you have a police culture that thinks the very reforms that we are talking about are wrong, then you won't change behavior. That you have to factor in all of those things in terms of why they have not yet worked fully, but they work enough so that it galvanizes the nation every time you see this kind of conduct, this kind of misconduct on video. If it weren't for video cameras, we wouldn't be having this discussion. There would have been no demonstrations. There would have been no galvanizing of the larger population with the view that they now see how brutal the police have been with us. So I don't want anything to be said here today to discourage people from advocating until we get it, full implementation of body cameras. I think that would be a serious mistake.
And let me ask this question. This has come up in a number of different ways, but there's someone who wrote this that I think is asking a question and really wanting to understand what is the most this person, I think, is from Chicago, that when you're living in a community that's riddled with violence, state sanctioned and citizen induced, and there's no reprieve, what is the proper, most effective response in the moment? Not in the short term, the long term, but the immediate. We have children and elders, and we are human beings who are deserving of support and basic rights to safety. And so I think this is a question that this person is having of how when you talk about safety and community, we talk about being safe, how can and they said they live in Baltimore. How can they have, and we got this question from someone in Chicago as well. How can they achieve that? What can they do not in the long term, but in the short term, the immediate to protect their children and the elders?
Well, when you don't have a viable Black family because of all of the problems we've seen historically, you have to rebuild that family. And simply stated, the problem in the Black community can be boiled down to one sentence. We are not giving kids the appropriate training and education for them to become productive members of our society. And while a few people escape from that and miraculously get that education and that training, most do not. And so if we don't rebuild the Black family, all is lost, because otherwise kids will be raising themselves. And you've seen that for the past 3 generations. And so unless we spend a lot of money and effort in rebuilding the Black family, all is lost. These kids need parents. They don't have parents. And when they do have parents, they usually have one. And that parent is forced to work 2 jobs to pay the rent and to get the food, let alone not being enough for higher education. And so when this persists, then we don't have a remedy except to put a Band-Aid on cancer. And you know that doesn't work. And so we must
talking through the comprehensive approach to safety.
We must rebuild the Black family. We must rebuild the poor white family structure, because kids don't raise themselves. And when they try to, they do a miserable job. And if you want to look at the genesis of crime and the genesis of violence, it's usually children who have not been raised properly. And we can't ignore kids. We have to focus on making sure that they get the kind of training and development for their intellect, for their heart, for their morality, that will enable them to understand and see what's going on around them as wrong and not participate in it. But how do you, if you got 2 parents and both of them are working 2 jobs, how do you raise those kids? If you don't have access to childcare, how do you raise those kids? And these are things we can do things about that will have a meaningful impact on the Black community and the poor white community. And just think, it will empower women to play their full role in society, whether they be Black women or white women. And so there's some really simple fixes if we're committed to doing it, and if we allocate the resources to make it happen. And so that would be my legislative initiative in response to what you've eloquently said, Ms. Boggs, about Ms. Bugs, I'm sorry, about what the problems are. We've got to be solution oriented, and we've got to put it simply enough to all of those who are interested in helping us, so that they have a clear idea of where the priorities for legislative change must be.
Dr. Bugs, what would you say to the person who?
I would say that, yes, people are hurting. Violence rips apart families and communities, and we have to listen to people, and we have to, I agree with Mr. Murphy, we have to invest in families, family stability and family security. There are too many people who are hurting, and this pandemic and the economic fallout from the pandemic, and the lack of adequate response to people's pain and suffering economically, to the deaths that have happened from the pandemic. There's so much going on that causes hurt and harm and disruption to families. And so we need to be having conversations around why the violence is occurring, why people are hurting, and then really invest in the security and stability of those families and the communities? It's a tough question because I know people want, there's a lot in cities around the country, there's surges of violence on top of the pandemic and on top of the economic duress that a lot of people are suffering from. But it really is about security and stability of families and communities, because people want to be safe, people want to be free from harm and trauma. And when you invest in that, then you reduce violence and you create stability and safety.
Absolutely.
But you see,
Let me say this. I have a couple-
the difficulty is in the implementation. And I think our audience, again, wants to know what they can do to make sure these things happen. And I'd like to focus on that if we can, because that gives people something meaningful to do.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to the Black family, for example, we got to focus on childcare initiatives and the money to pay for it. We have to make sure that kids have something to do until their parents get home tired from work. We have to have after school programs where we don't require overburdened teachers to run those programs, but we use other people who are properly trained to keep kids busy learning in an environment where they can have fun, where they are fully engaged. And we need to have residential schools where children can be isolated from the environment, actually live on the premises, and be given an enriched education that prepares them to unlock their genius. And by the way, great philosopher Buckmaster Fuller once said that all of us are born with genius brains, but the process of life degeniuses us. And if you're normal, you have an incredible brain. And this brain is a genius creation. And if you are honest with yourself and you say, who's smarter, me or my brain? The brain wins every time. And so we've got to figure out how to unleash the genius in all of us so that we can rise to where we can become powerful agents of change. And it starts with the children.
Now, let me say this. There are so many questions. We only allowed it for an hour. I feel like I've cheated people on here, but I've not cheated you, because this is what I'm going to do. On October 8th, we're having a symposium around, as a part of the end of this. I think this topic is one that people want to continue discussing, one that people want to delve into. We have a number of questions that people have around when you talk about police reform, and you both talked about body-worn cameras. People want to know the research that you're talking about, Dr. Buggs, and be able to get access to that research. And also the research you both talked about, Billy. Dr. Buggs, we want to hear about your papers, what you're writing, what you're seeing across the landscape. And Billy, as well as Ben, and let me tell everyone, Ben wanted to be here, and he was here. He got called away to an unexpected emergency, and we knew that at the start of the hour, but we were just grateful for him to be here. I think we should continue this conversation in this symposium, and I want to, if you both be willing, be able to invite you back along with Ben to maybe talk about that, go deeper, and really have a robust conversation at a more extended time. But first of all, I just want to say thank you, Billy, for all you do for our community. You stand in the gap for so many of us. You've been on the front line. Ben talked about you as a mentor. You're a mentor to so many of us. Thankful for Ben Crump standing in the gap, representing so many families, unfortunately, that have lost more than they could ever bear. And so just thankful for him. Dr. Buggs, grateful for you for being a scholar and young, gifted, and Black, and beautiful, and standing in research and undergirding your work. And just grateful for you and your leadership in this country on this issue. And thankful for everyone for attending. Again, we're going to be able to pick this up again. I think this is a conversation that deserves more than an hour, and I'd love to give that to it and bring you both back. let me say a couple of things to close out, because this is not the end. We have another Just Us dialogue next Thursday at 5 o'clock. This is on protecting our youth, confronting society's role in the harmonious development of adolescents. You do not want to miss this one. Please follow us. Please also stay in contact with Ben Crump at Attorney Crump on Instagram and Twitter. Dr. Bugs at Shani, so SHANIB 44 on Twitter, and Billy Murphy with the Murphy Falcon, so www.murphyfalcon.com, and at WBillyMurphy on Twitter. Thank you both so much for all you do. And again, we're going to continue this conversation and have you as a part of that symposium if you both would be so gracious to be able to talk on this topic even more.
Can we thank you for putting on this program?
Oh,
and for all you have done. I mean, you have been growing in power and influence from the time that I met you. You've had a series of remarkable jobs, and now you're at Johns Hopkins, where you can do a lot of good.
Yes.
So we appreciate you extraordinarily, and we want all the best for you. And by the way, can you hold on to the questions that people have asked so that the next time perhaps you can deal more directly with what they are asking?
No, absolutely. I have a dream team behind me that is, I know, copying the questions that we've received. We've been recording, but we're going to make sure we bring those questions back up in the symposium as well.
And by the way, I would like to collaborate with you, Ms. Bugs, because you're a brilliant young woman. And hopefully that collaboration can bear fruit, and we can be even more influential and powerful in getting the reforms that we need.
Absolutely. Thank you for all that you do. Ms. Wilson, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. And I want to again thank Johns Hopkins University, Johns Hopkins Health System, as well as the Urban Health Institute for their leadership in putting this all on. And let me not be remiss in not thanking the amazing team that's been behind the scene: Audrey Johnson, Elizabeth Hafey, Jackie Bryan, Marissa McKeever, Antonia Daniels, Dr. Vanya Jones, all who have been just great leaders in this work, and so grateful for them. All right, with that, we're going to sign off, and everyone have a great night, but please join us next Thursday, but also mark your calendars for October 8th. Thank you.